understand some of the issues. And I'm delighted to tell you that yesterday, one of our friends sent me a list that all around the state, literally scores of rallies are being held. There was a big one in Syracuse here a couple of weeks ago. On March the 23rd, people came from all over the state for that. There are other rallies being planned, and today I saw that there were rallies scheduled all across the state. The people of New York are very responsive to the SAFE Act, and I'm sure they're also responsive to the national issue as well. So we want to make resources available. So the last two sessions we had the Undersheriff Warren Darby from the Onondaga Sheriff's Department come and talk about the sheriff's response to the SAFE Act. It's maybe not surprising if you understand the character of our governor, that he not only railroaded this through and did his message of necessity accordingly, which is being contested, but also he never even thought to ask the sheriffs what they thought. But 52 sheriffs in the state of New York disagreed with many of the contents of the SAFE Act. And so we had them come last time, and he spoke on one night, and then John Malone, the deputy sheriff, who's going to run for sheriff next year to replace Kevin Walsh, hopefully on the Republican Party, but he came also and spoke. And both of these men gave us some information. The sheriff's response to the New York SAFE Act is available out there at the first table as you go out. And secondly, there's also other areas where people are working, and Turn Albany Upside Down is saying, make your voice heard, repeal the SAFE Act. And then we also have a little flyer talking about our New York game plan. I won't go into detail about it tonight, we'll bring it up another time. But we're trying to find a way to say, what can we say that would make an impression on Governor Cuomo, as well as all these other things. And what we're basically suggesting is that hunters leave the state next year, do not hunt here in this New York area, and if many of them were to do that, it would drain the coffers not dry, but there's $32 million a year invested in hunting licenses, etc., etc. Now that's a real sacrifice for hunters, I know, although I'm not a hunter, I understand their passion about that. So the SAFE Act is one area that we've dealt with, and there's material out there you can get as you leave on that subject. Secondly, on the Frontiers radio station now, we've developed a website. And as I said, we're going to put the materials, we're going to videotape tonight, and that will take a few weeks for us to get organized, but that will make available, if you want to get my card, showing you when I'm on the radio, and the frontiersradio.com network that we have set up at the website, etc., you can get that as well. We also wanted to bring other resources to your people in Washington. I didn't go down, but I got on the phone and spoke with people in Washington about a magazine called Whistleblower. It's from World Net Daily. And they produced a series of magazines that are very, very timely, very, very appropriate, very, very factual. And the one that came out in February was Tyranny or Stupidity, the Total Irrationality of the New Gun Control Movement. And it is certainly irrational, unless you understand it's also maybe insidious. If you say that we should take away guns from people because somebody might use them illegally, well then let's look at the logic of that. Number one, there are more people get killed every year by drunken drivers. So let's take away automobile licenses. Nobody drives any cars, because it may turn out that some drunken driver would get in one and kill somebody. Secondly, more people die from knives than they do from guns. So let's raid the kitchens of all your housewives and take all your knives away, and go to all the restaurants and take all their knives away, for fear that somebody might misuse a knife and kill somebody. Or what about fists? And more people die as the result of a fist and a blow than they do, so let's handcuff everybody. The logic is very illogical, and I think this article is very, very important. Tyranny or stupidity, the total irrationality of the new gun control movement. The facts bear out that more guns produce less crime. Safe citizens keep criminals from doing worse than they do. Secondly, they came out next month with how America is becoming a police state, a rather alarming topic to say the least. But that's why tonight we're going to focus in on how America is. Buerkle, our congresswoman tonight, will have time to tell us, but we will make these available for a small price of $3 as you leave tonight. Now, we want to thank all of our policemen, all of our military. So if you're a retired or active military personnel, or you're a retired or active law enforcement officer, would you please stand? Let's give you a vote. Now, when we begin this program, you may be seated. When we begin this program in just a moment, we're going to have an opportunity to have a song, God Bless America, Pledge of Allegiance, and a prayer. And if any of you heard what the President said and what Homeland Security said, if I'm clinging to my Bible and I'm clinging to a rifle, I'm a homegrown terrorist. Anybody else qualify for that? Yeah, praise the Lord for that. So anyway, we want to be up front about the fact that our founding fathers believed this was one nation under God. And that's my favorite reference as a pastor, although these issues have relevance to a lot more people than those people who are embracing faith. So tonight as we start, we'd like to start with Pledge Allegiance to the American flag, and then we'll have a young lady come up here and sing for us, God Bless America. You can stand and sing it with her. And if you follow the music, it's a little different in the way it's styled, but you can catch the words. And after that, I'm going to have one of our men who works with us, Paul Franco, come and lead us in prayer, and then we'll begin the program tonight. Let's do this. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. You may be seated.
God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above. From the mountains to the prairies, to the oceans wide with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet.
back pages of history to examine what the Founding Fathers had in mind when they adopted the Second Amendment, saying, "The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed." So today we have to ask people in politics, in the press, and in other places, what part of "shall not be infringed" do you not understand? Do you not understand what the Founding Fathers meant? Well, I'd like to review that for you tonight. And whatever party affiliation you have or political background you have, examine what the Founding Fathers said against the comments being made by people in power who may want to move to take away these Second Amendment rights. Samuel Adams said, "The Constitution shall never be construed to authorize Congress to prevent the people of the United States who are peaceable citizens from keeping their own arms." Thomas Jefferson said, "Laws that forbid the carrying of arms disarm only those who are neither inclined nor determined to commit crimes. Such laws make things worse for the assaulted and better for the assailants." Agreed. He also said, "The Constitution of the United States asserts that all power is inherent in the people, that they may exercise it by themselves, that it is their right and duty at all times to be armed." Alexander Hamilton said, "The best we can hope for concerning the people at large is that they be properly armed." And then in 1833, the U.S. Supreme Court Justice Joseph Story commented on the interpretation and understanding of the Second Amendment and said this, "The right of citizens to keep and bear arms has been justly considered as the safeguard of the liberties of a republic. It offers a strong moral check against the usurpation and arbitrary powers of rulers and will enable the people to resist and triumph over them." George Washington said, and I will repeat this twice, "Firearms stand next in importance to the Constitution itself." I believe that if they can take away our Second Amendment rights, they can walk away with the rest of them. Firearms stand next in importance to the Constitution itself, he said. "Events, occurrences, and tendency proves that to ensure peace, security, and happiness, the rifle and pistol are equally indispensable. The very atmosphere of firearms everywhere restrains evil influence." Well, the facts are, more guns, less crime. James Madison said, "Americans need never fear their government because of the advantage of being armed, which the Americans possess over the people of almost every other nation." These comments by the Founding Fathers tell us clearly what they had in mind. And for any politician to say that he swears to keep the oath of defending the Constitution and the laws of the United States, who reinterprets these laws, is in fallacious country and making a grave mistake and may become dangerous to our liberties. James Madison expressed deep insight into man's potential nature and correctly observed that the unalienable right to bear arms protected the people, and it was a unique right, and to take away those rights would seriously endanger people against potential tyranny. So let's look into history to see where again and again, when a government infringes on those rights, the stage is set for such a horrible scenario. And I'm going to begin with a much forgotten example of our own history. The time, 1890. The place, Wounded Knee Creek on the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota, where 279 Sioux Indians were in their winter camp. The 7th Cavalry had come to confiscate their arms for their own safety and protection, they said. But instead, after the majority had peacefully turned in their firearms, the soldiers turned on them and slaughtered them, 2/3 of them being women and children. To think that 20 members of that unit were actually given the Medal of Honor shows how even in America, evil can at times prevail. This was among the first federally backed gun confiscation attempts in our history, and there have been others since then. The time, 1878. The place, India, where the pacifist Mahatma Gandhi asked his followers to peacefully protest the overreaching arms of the British Empire. When the government passed the Indian Arms Act of that year, the government was authorized to confiscate any and all firearms which then led to 68 more years of British oppression. It's interesting that Mahatma Gandhi, the pacifist, said this in his diary. Among the many misdeeds of the British rule in history, among the many misdeeds of the British rule in India, history will look upon the act of depriving a whole nation of arms, the blackest. The time, 1911. The place, Turkey, where the last days of the Muslim Ottoman Empire were closing in, and the government was intent on eliminating their Christian Armenian population who had revolted in 1893. While anti-Armenian mobs were being armed, Armenians were told to surrender their weapons, and eventually laws were passed forbidding them to carry weapons or ammunition without permission. Most complied, but when they did, they were executed on conspiracy charges. By 1915, the rest of them were sent off on death marches, where many died, to 25 death camps, where many more would die. Along the road, soldiers would rob, rape, and beat the people. Eventually, many as 1.5 million people died, many of them Christians, in what has been called the Armenian Holocaust, for which Turkey has never, ever recanted. The time, 1929. The place, Russia. As Stalin took over Russia and continued the lethal laws that were first established under Lenin, which by the way were ordered because of an assassination attempt on his life, all firearms, ammunition, and sabers were to be confiscated. As such, from 1929 to 1935, 20 million people were murdered, worked to death in slave camps, or deliberately starved to death, helpless to defend themselves. Lenin knew what he was doing when he said, one man with a gun can control 100 without one, make mass searches, and hold executions for found arms. And then one you probably remember, the time, 1935, place, Nazi Germany. Hitler had assumed power and was intent in Mein Kampf to destroy the Jewish population in his final solution. In 1935, he said, for the first time, a civilized nation has full gun registration, which led to confiscation, which led to annihilation. That's the pattern when an evil government is in control. In a report of secret conversations he said this: the most foolish mistake we could make would be to allow the subject peoples to possess arms. Heinrich Himmler said, the head of the SS, Germans who wish to use firearms should join the SS. Ordinary students don't need guns as their guns don't serve the state. The more socialistic a country becomes, the more threatening their tyranny becomes, the more in danger our liberties become. Some people debate whether or not the Jews could have actually stalled the Holocaust or fought back had they their guns, but I know that the warriors in the Warsaw Ghetto would have been better off if they'd been able to have guns when they put up a heroic fight against the Germans. From 1939 to 1945, 13 million Jews, gypsies, mentally ill, homosexual, and others were killed, all of them having previously been disarmed by laws by force. One last example. Time, 1935. Place, Red China, where Mao Zedong controlled millions of Chinese people, saying, all political power comes from the barrel of a gun. The Communist Party must command all guns. That way, no guns can ever be used to command the party. And although the historical records are not available, it is said that 20 million dissidents died in Red China because of this. In the 20th century, estimates are at least 56 million people died because the government took away their right to defend themselves and they were helpless in the face of tyranny. What should we then think about what's going on in America? We need to be candid. We need to be very careful and analytical in what we see and what we think. We can't conspire to say, we can't rather make up conspiracy theories necessarily, but we should look at the evidence to say, is our government moving more towards power and less towards the people? Is our government moving more towards now in the processes that are going on to take away our Second Amendment rights, which our founding fathers were to guarantee us? It's a very concerning situation. Tonight I'm very happy to say that we have someone here who can speak to the issue from personal experience, having served in the Congress. And I want you to welcome Congresswoman Anne Marie Buerkle as she talks about, is there a national threat to our Second Amendment rights?
Being here tonight, it's Saturday night, and I know there's so many other doing, but it is important that you're here, and we're grateful that you're here. And Bruce thanked our veterans and our law enforcement folks who are here in the audience, and let's take a moment also to remember the men and women who serve in our military and who are in harm's way as they fight to protect this freedom for us to gather, this freedom of speech, and yes, our freedom to bear arms. So let's keep our thoughts and prayers on those in harm's way. I'm going to, and I don't often admit this as a lawyer, make a foundation. They always told me, tell them you're a nurse, tell them you're a mother, but don't tell them you're a lawyer. So as I was preparing my speech for tonight, I was thinking, I really do need to build a foundation. And I'm going to spend just the first few minutes of my talk tonight to talk to you about the foundation of why what we're doing and what we're so concerned about is so legitimate. It has nothing to do with a political party. It has nothing to do with whether you're a liberal or a conservative. This is something that pertains to every American. So I want to build that foundation for you because one of the purposes of this series of talks is to educate all of you and to educate you on the issues so that you can speak to your neighbor and you can speak to your family and most importantly, you can speak to your elected official. So let's start first of all, and Bruce talked a lot about our founding fathers, but I want to give you the very foundation for where this right emanates. As you know, in 1776, the Declaration of Independence was adopted by Congress. And that was the public declaration by this nation that we would declare ourselves free from Great Britain. The argument of the Declaration of Independence is straightforward, and this is the part I want to emphasize to all of you. Individuals possess these rights by nature. Government derives its just power from the consent of the governed. It is the role of government, and for those of you who have heard me speak hundreds of times, I always say, the rights that we enjoy as American citizens, and our forefathers knew it so well, emanate to us from our Creator. And the government's only legitimate role is to protect those rights. And we've come so far in the course of what our nation is doing and what our government is doing, that we've come to the point where our government now is, in their backwards thinking or worse, believes that it's their duty to give us our rights. And that's absolutely wrong. Our rights, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, they were divine inspirations. That the power that we enjoy as American citizens comes to us from our Creator and not from the government. And the only job of that government, and I'll read it again, individuals possess these rights by nature, and government derives its just power from the consent of the governed. Right. We decide, not the government. The purpose of the government is to secure these fundamental rights, and although the government cannot be changed for trivial reasons, this is important, the people retain the right to alter or abolish government when it becomes destructive to these ends. As you know, the Declaration of Independence listed a whole lot of grievances by the American colonies and a firm commitment and a reliance on the protection of the divine providence and declared themselves free and independent. Fast forward 11 years and the Declaration of Independence was in place, but they realized they needed something more. So they met in Philadelphia and they created a constitution. 3.5 months, the convention established a constitution, and what they did was they established a government that would secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. And that's what our forefathers intended. The purpose was to establish a form of government of adequate but limited powers, all carefully enumerated in a written constitution. These forefathers knew they had just come through the tyranny of Great Britain. They had just come through, they knew what they wanted. They wanted a government that had adequate powers, but their powers were limited. And so they established the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and then the remaining amendments. The Second Amendment was adopted in 1751 with the rest of the Bill of Rights. And I'll read it, very simple. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Pretty straightforward. I think it's important to note that the Second Amendment is the only amendment of the Constitution that states a purpose. And the purpose of the Second Amendment being necessary to the security of a free state. How profound is that? A foundation, and Bruce talked about this, I'll go through this quickly, a foundation of American political thoughts during the revolutionary period of time was really concerned, and it was justifiably concerned, about political corruption and government tyranny. Even the Federalists, those who thought we should have a big central government, were very careful to acknowledge the risks of tyranny against, and the fear that this government would become too powerful. And against this background, the framers saw the personal right to bear arms as a potential check against tyranny. So our right to bear arms and our Second Amendment right is specifically enumerated in our Constitution. It's very important for us to know and to realize and to understand that that isn't something that came from a political party. That is the essence. The Bill of Rights, the Constitution, are the essence of America. They are they're our game plan, our blueprint for what this nation is. So the Second Amendment is grounded in our Constitution. And then even on top of that, I'm going to just talk about two Supreme Court cases. So now we've got the law of every man's right in America to carry and bear arms. D.C. versus Heller in 2008, the court ruled that the Second Amendment protects the right of an individual to possess a firearm unconnected to service in a militia and to use that arm for traditionally lawful purposes such as self-defense within the home. Heller pertained to 3 D.C. District of Columbia ordinances involving a restriction on firearms, and the Supreme Court in that decision said no, every American has the right to bear arms. A second court case, McDonald versus Chicago, the court ruled that the Second Amendment limits state and local government to the same extent that it limits the federal government. And how important is that decision based on what we saw our governor in New York State just do? Both of these rulings, and this is so important, we've got the Constitution and both of these Supreme Court rulings upheld the individual right of everyone to bear arms. So the topic I'm supposed to cover tonight is really whether or not there's a national threat to our Second Amendment rights. And I am sorry to tell you here, but it's no surprise to any of you, that yes, there is a national threat against our Second Amendment rights. I'm not going to talk about the SAFE Act. Many of you are very well informed about that, really the overreach of the state government. And as Bruce mentioned, I would highly recommend you pick up that handout from the sheriffs because they talk about their grave concerns about that piece of legislation. And you know, I must say, as anecdotally, the SAFE Act was so reminiscent of the Affordable Care Act. Just that in the dark of night, quickly, don't read it, it's an emergency, we got to get it through. And you know, for any of those of you who have teenagers, whenever you watch your teenager behave secretly or sneaky and everything, you know that something's not right. And that's exactly what happened with both of these pieces of legislation. Until Sandy Hook, the constitutional right to keep and bear arms was really one of the only legal cultural battlefields on which the progressives were consistently shot down. They tried for years, and gun control has been something, it's like a run-on for years and years, but they weren't successful. Even those so many Americans really uphold and value this freedom that they were very careful to stay away from it. So really there was not much success. And in 4 years, really, we didn't see too much from the administration talking about gun control until Sandy Hook. Politicians and others intent on restricting or eliminating our firearms ignore the mountains of evidence. All the same conclusions, that guns in the hands of responsible, law-abiding citizens always, in all places and times, result in a safer, more secure, and more civilized society. And that is really the basis of what we're going to talk about tonight. So it's really a combination of elitists working with the emotional, misguided, fearful, and the ignorant that make up this really a formidable hierarchy of talent who's really determined at this point in our nation's history to disarm America. So I'm going to talk to you tonight about two national threats. And ladies and gentlemen, they are very timely and they are imminent. And so if you have a piece of paper or we can provide this with you, there's two very important initiatives that are coming up that we need every American to stand up for and to contact their representatives. Just this past week on April 11th, the Senate, by a vote of 68 to 31, voted to move forward with debates and votes on a variety of gun control proposals. The underlying bill is Senate Bill 649. That is the underlying piece of legislation. It's called the Safe Communities, Safe School Acts of 2013. So they voted last week in the Senate to go forward with a debate and with amendments to this underlying bill. So next week, a number of amendments will be offered to 649, including a ban on commonly and lawfully owned firearms and magazines, and language to criminalize the private transfer of firearms and force gun owners to get government permission to transfer guns to friends after advertising. And that advertising be something you might have posted on Facebook or something that you might put in a gun club newsletter. This language is considered a misguided compromise proposal, and you may have seen, everyone was all excited about this bipartisan Joe Manchin from West Virginia, Pat Toomey from Pennsylvania, and our own Chuck Schumer from New York. And what they're doing is they propose this language that I just read to you in lieu of the original language that Chuck Schumer had in the legislation, which provides for provisions for background checks. That they're probably, I'll get into this a little bit, this coming week they will vote and they'll go through that whole series of amendments that will hammer out this underlying bill. I would suggest that if the Senate is truly interested and concerned about enhancing safety, it will replace the current provisions of Senate Bill 649 with language that is properly focused on mental health inadequacies, prosecuting violent criminals, and keeping our kids safe in our schools. The next round of votes on these measures, 649, will take place on Tuesday, April 16th. All citizens must call and fax their senators urging them to oppose 640 and all anti-gun amendments to that bill, and encourage your families and your friends. We really have to swamp the senators' offices. Now, realistically and very unfortunately in New York, but they deserve to hear from you. And I would your congressional representative in whatever district you live to encourage them. The other part that it has not happened, there's a lot of discussion. The representative should be, don't take up any more or additional gun legislation in the House, and to your senators, it should be oppose 649, oppose any anti-guns legislation or amendments that may be added to that bill. Before I just get into the second threat, the second national threat that we really face, I want to make some brief comments to all of you about mental health. Many of you know my background has been in the healthcare field. And the issue is not being discussed at all. It's amazing to me. It's not being, neither is the issue of gangs, poverty issues, loss of hope, erosion of values, and really the much broader problem, very close. These instances are what are used in Adam Lanza, James Holmes in Colorado, Jerry Lochner in Arizona, and the Virginia Tech shooter. Any of this legislation that I just talked about, or the SAFE Act in New York, would not have stopped what happened in those 4 horrific situations.
That's right.
It's in this knee-jerk emotional response and the need for politicians to feel like they're doing something. They're going after this problem completely wrong. Do we have a problem of today? Absolutely. But for those of you who live here in this area, we all lived through a horrific situation a few weeks back, where a woman was stabbed to death and her young daughter was raped. That is unspeakable violence. That is unspeakable crime. And that did not involve the use of the gun. So why are we so focused on guns rather than looking at the problems that our society faces today? In this country, there is such a lack for mental health care. There's no clear path. If you are a psychologist, or if you are a teacher, or if you are a social worker, there's no clear path for you to get to a judge with an attorney to represent the person you're concerned about in order to declare whether or not that person's mentally incompetent. The mental health care system in this country is in pieces. It's in shambles. Health insurance companies, if you've tried to get basic counseling, your health insurance, your premiums may not cover it at all, or it may cover 10 visits, but it's very limited. And the mental health issues should be raised to the level of physical health. When someone is mentally ill, they are just as sick as if they've broken their leg. And until and unless our society realizes that and eliminates that stigma that's attached to mental health, we will continue to see these horrific problems and this terrible violence. Adam Lanza, the guns that he used were obtained legally. Nothing in this legislation would have stopped those crimes, and it's so important to realize and to understand and appreciate. We talked about what we saw here locally. Just last week in Texas at a college, there were there were people wounded again with a knife. It's unspeakable violence. It's unspeakable crime. And it goes to a much broader problem in society today. And I would argue that the entertainment field has so much to do with this, the message that our kids get today. I would argue that, again, this lack of mental health, corrosion of values, the breakdown of the family, the problems that we see in our society today are so broad. And to think that controlling guns is the way to go, it's narrow-minded, and it really leads you to believe that rather than seriously addressing this problem of violence in our country, that there is another agenda. And that's, I think, why everyone is so concerned with these attacks on Second Amendment rights. I just want to talk briefly about Chicago. You talk about violence. Chicago, as of January 16th of this year, 26 people have already been killed. And I use January 16th because of the irony of the 26 being killed versus the 26 people who were killed at Sandy Hook. Why aren't we talking about the gang violence in Chicago? Is that something that we should just accept? Why aren't the problems that they're seeing in the inner cities, whether it's Detroit, the District of Columbia, or Chicago, why aren't we talking about those issues? Because, and really, understanding that the problem our society faces is far greater than the use of guns. The second national threat that I want to talk to you about, and you should write this down as well, in addition to Senate 649, the bill that they're going to take up next week. 2 or 3 weeks ago when I was in Auburn, and we did the first series of talks, we talked about the UN and 150 countries being down in New York as we spoke, talking about a treaty that would affect gun rights. Well, last week that treaty was passed. So the treaty, and I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about what the treaty, the UN treaty, what it tries to do. The treaty aims to outline a new set of regulations for the international trade of firearms, to eliminate illicit gun trade and prevent funds from contributing to human suffering. The last one is the most ominous, and I said funds, it's guns, and prevent guns from contributing to human suffering. And the last is the most ominous because you could put almost every single firearm on that list, on that national control list, if you're talking about guns preventing violence. You could find a justification to put it there. Not surprisingly, the UN passed that treaty last week. Now, this treaty must be stopped from ever coming on American soil. The only way that treaty can come into this country and be effective in this country is if the Senate ratifies that treaty. So again, we've got to get to our senators and make it loud, send them a loud and clear message that this treaty must not be ratified. The only thing that stands in the way of the president signing that treaty is the Senate. There are 100 senators in this country, and they must hear from us. They must hear from us in a very passionate, loud, and clear way, with a message that America will not stand for an international treaty. There are many questions and concerns about this UN treaty. Will the UN try to impose international or licensing requirements or an international registry? Or will they impose international regulations for the trade, sale, importation, and private ownership of our semi-automatic firearms? Contact your congressman to vote for the House Continuing Resolution 23. So that's your congressman. It's House Continuing Resolution 23, or in the Senate Continuing Resolution 7, which would resolve that the president could not sign the UN Arms Treaty and that no federal funds would be used to authorize or implement the arms trade agreement. Those are two very imminent threats that our nation faces with regards to our Second Amendment rights. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence and a lot of other things that we could talk about. We've all heard of the billion-plus rounds of ammunition that the government bought. You've all heard of the armored vehicles that the government has purchased. But these two issues that I've talked to you tonight about, the Senate Bill 649 and the UN Arms Treaty, are here and they're now, and it's up to us to make sure that our senators and our representatives understand where we stand on this issue and that they will be held accountable if they don't uphold our Second Amendment rights. I want to end our time tonight with a quote from Frederick Douglass. He wisely said, "Citizenship requires 3 boxes: the ballot box, the jury box, and the cartridge box." Thank you all very much. It's wonderful to be here with you.
We're going to ask our ushers to come down and give you a card, and you can put a question on there, and I will take the questions. Sometimes those questions are a little far afield, so I don't cover them. Sometimes they're repetitive, and I get the same question from different people, but we do our very best to answer all the questions you have to the best of our ability. So if you would come down the aisles, gentlemen, and pass out the cards, we'll take just a moment of reprieve, and we'll be right back. How many of you remember that film? Yeah, that was a very alarming film, and it was all fiction. But we're seeing some of the same signs today. So Congresswoman Anne-Marie Buerkle has given us some evidence. There's more evidence in this magazine and more that we could be saying to say that, yes, we definitely believe there's a national threat. And that's why as we continue this series, the next time we do the tour in this location and in Auburn, we'll have a man from the Second Amendment Foundation in Buffalo, and also Bob Schultz, who led up We the People of New York in the rally that took place in Albany months ago and is now filing a suit, to come in and ask, what's our legal leverage? What can we do as citizens legally? Now, we've been given the idea that we need to get to our senators, and we're not always sure whether they listen to us, but there's a lot of protests going on that may make an issue relevant for them to listen to. And then the last session we have is with Larry Pratt from Gun Owners of America, and he'll talk about an ideological elephant that's sometimes in the back of the room, and that is, what about civil disobedience? How far will this go, and how far will we have to be in order to defend our liberties? We're not promoting a revolution, but we don't know yet how far it will go. We need to be prepared, and that's why we're dealing with that in our last comment. Okay, how are we doing with the questions? Still coming?
If I could, while you're filling out your questions, Cheryl just handed me, she put together a list of U.S. senators. There's about 15 copies here, but and there's also some language to use if you contact them either about UN's Arms Treaty or Senate Bill 649. So we'll put that out and make that available to you as well.
Cheryl, would you stand, please? Cheryl will be out at one of the tables there to give you the information you can write down. And we've got index cards out there so you can write it down here as well. That's very helpful to us. We'll have them out there for people to pick up, but if we run out of them, we need to have the information available. Residents say no to police surveillance drones. Persecution of gun shop owners illustrate dangers of a standing army of federal cops. These are very serious issues. We'll leave it at that. But again, these are available. They were much more expensive than we were able to get them for, but we wanted to make them available so for a minimal donation of $3, we can have you keep each of those magazines. As an attorney, how do you feel the upcoming case to repeal the New York SAFE Act will go on April 24th or 29th when heard?
Well, I mentioned the second Supreme Court decision that specifically mentioned that states have to be held to the same limitations as the federal government when it comes to the Second Amendment. So I'm hoping that that at least will be precedent. But there's a whole number of questions and issues that are raised in the case against New York State with the SAFE Act. Bruce mentioned about the exigent circumstance where they can pass a bill without having it, people being allowed to review the language for 3 days, and the governor said it was an emergency and it needed to be done quickly. Just on that alone, I think that there will be many reasons, and I'm hopeful it will get overturned. And what we have seen with the Affordable Care Act, certain pieces get thrown out, but you really would like to see the whole law be repealed. I think it's stunning, and if you read what the sheriffs put together about the SAFE Act, I think it's stunning that law enforcement has taken such a hard stand with the SAFE Act, and I hope that that will bode well.
Yeah, and also I understand I think 62 counties, at least half of them have passed resolutions to request the repeal of the SAFE Act. There's a lot of interest and a lot of involvement in our state level. We're very happy for that. Here's a question: is it not illegal for the government to store ammunition, and who's paying for this ammo? Well, I guess we're paying for it with tax dollars. Is it illegal for them to do that?
I'm not aware of any, and whoever wrote that question, if you want to come up to me at the end and just ask or tell me what your basis for thinking it's illegal, for the government to store ammunition. I'm not aware of any statute that prohibits it, and certainly I would guess it's our taxpayer dollar that's paying for it.
And of course, I don't remember the exact statistics, but they're buying enough for people to have ammunition for at least 24 to 40 years. I've heard two different figures, which you say, why in the world would they need that unless there's something ominous on the outside? Is it helpful to call other representatives beside our own, and is there a congressman in the 24th district?
It's helpful, I think. As someone who was in that position, certainly the people from your own district, when they contact you, they get the priority. But if as a senator or if as a representative you get deluged with it, and we call it a campaign against or for some issue, you certainly take notice. And so I think once you make sure that your representative, your senator, and your congressman have heard from you, and you've made it real clear, and then hang on to your answer if you get one, and hold it accountable. And if you're not happy with your answer, go back to them. But then it certainly does no harm at all for you to contact others, especially here in the area in New York. We've got not only Dan Buffet from 24th, got Richard Hanna, Bill Owens from up north. You can contact all of them and let them know exactly where you stand on the issue.
As a lawyer, can you shed any light on how ex post facto laws may be applied to someone charged from the, according to the NYS Unsafe Act, it's called? I'm quite sure I understand the question.
I'm not sure I understand either. Whoever asked this, I'm happy to talk to you afterwards and clarify. Okay.
Well, I made a mistake here. There are many veterans that are not career retired veterans. I didn't mean for them to necessarily be retired veterans. Why did you not ask for them to stand as veterans? I thought I intended to include them all, but if that's an oversight, I apologize. Okay. How effective would it be to refuse to obey the law as a civil right, like a gun ownership? It's important as using the front of a bus or a drinking fountain, like the civil rights. And that's where we're going to go on that question at the last of our tour. You want to answer that?
Well, I think, as with any issue, it really is your conscience, and if you believe that a law is unconscionable and you can't follow it, then, you know, as I'm sure you've listened to Bob Lonsberry, Bob will always say, what would Rosa Parks do? And throughout the course of our history, people have involved themselves in civil disobedience to make a stand and to really what they're making is a moral stand against something that they believe is unconstitutional and against the essence and the laws of this land. So that would be a personal decision, I would say. As Bruce mentioned, ongoing throughout the course of the talks, that would be one of the topics of discussion.
This is a correction or a clarification that claims that they only awarded these bullets and really don't have possession of them. They claim it's a misleading fact. Maybe. Well, I think we know how to understand this question without addressing it, and that is, Governor Cuomo wants to end gun violence by taking our guns. How about the murders that take place in the abortion mills? And even there, you can see the press on the side of the liberal position, because this trial that's going on, I don't remember where, the press is not covering it. A man who killed babies after they were born. That's murder, that's genocide. Infanticide, I should say. So, the governor's not going to hear that, unfortunately. What percentage?
If I could interrupt 1 second. Speaking of the governor, I would say to all of you, and you have, and continue to, the governor has stirred a hornet's nest. And he's woken up a lot of people who maybe were just busy working and raising their families and really just interested in going out and hunting. I think he underestimates what he did with the SAFE Act. And I think we should be careful to use this opportunity to let your voices be heard and to open up your eyes and the eyes of your family members and your neighbors about what's going on in this state and nationally. We really need to take this opportunity because it's here, it's now, and it's in our face. And we're not talking theory anymore. We're talking about a law that's been, it's in effect in New York State.
Now, a couple of questions here. What can we do when Senator Schumer's office refuses to respond to your call? And that's one of the issues we face when we do write some of these petitions and letters.
I would say if you write a letter and you call and you don't get a response and you try again, then I would really, social media is a great way to get your messages out anymore. The post standard is down to 3 days a week, and I don't know. I think after me, they've stopped having that letter page. But you can write, you can go online, you can make your voice be heard and just talk about, I can't get a response from my elected official. And post it to your Facebook page. I've written to Senator Schumer 3 times, I've called the office twice, and I don't get any response. And get that out there and get that out there. And then certainly hold him accountable.
What do we do if a police officer asks for our firearms at that moment and afterwards? In some cases, there's a case of a man who got some kind of anxiety problem, and the police came and took away his gun. They went to the people who sold the gun to Adam Sava's mother and wanted to do something against them. It seems like that's another part of that police action that's taking place. But this is a tough question. What would we do, or what can we do? A police officer comes and asks for our firearms, and we have been legally permitted to have them.
Well, and that is the concern with the arbitrary nature of so much of the legislation within the SAFE Act. For instance, if you go to buy ammunition and the salesperson thinks it's too much, you're buying too much, and it raises a question in his mind, he has an obligation to report it. Within the instance that Bruce is talking about over in Buffalo, that person, they went and they seized his firearms and his ammunition. He got a lawyer, and then the next day they decided that they had seized weapons from the wrong person. And the reason, and the unfortunate part about that is he had the wherewithal and he had the ability to go out and retain a lawyer. But for those who don't, that's the problem with this legislation. It's arbitrary.
Well, here's a couple of endorsements for you. We all voted for you, but how will you change the conversation when your side is never portrayed as anything but racist? And the second question is, I hope you will run again to displace the youthless Dan Fay. Just repeat what you say. Any word on this as yet?
No, not yet. But it certainly is something we're considering, and I appreciate your support. But there's an awful lot we've got to do in the meantime, and really bearing down on your representatives and your senators about these two pieces of legislation, because the Senate's going to take up those amendments next week, next Tuesday.
Do you think the facts in the Sandy Hook shootings were manipulated by some in the media and government to promote the agenda of restricted firearms?
Well, all of us are used to the media manipulating the news and telling us what they want to tell us. I mean, that's just the media and what we're up against. But what we do know about Sandy Hook was there were weapons that were obtained legally. There was a young man who was severely mentally ill. There was a mother who didn't know how to channel or how to get help for this young man. He went into a school that was a gun-free zone. I mean, in certain parts of we know, you say to yourself, in called gun-free zone areas, not having guards in schools with guns and with weapons. There's a lot of things we know. So whether or not the media manipulated it, what we do know really indicates that this legislation that they're passing or trying to pass is really misguided.
Well, the facts of the matter are, I had a gentleman on my program one Friday night, and John Watt wrote a book called More Guns, Less Crime. Internationally, America is one of the lowest of countries for murder rates, except for Chicago, of course. Because we have people in this country who own guns to protect themselves. That's a simple, logical thing to think. That's why I think we have to suspect what's going on to take away our right to bear arms, because that is actually true. Now, a gun-free zone issue, I'd like to come in on that if I may. I was really moved, like so many of you were, when we saw the Sandy Hook massacre. You watched the policemen outside, huddled over, crying and talking to each other. And you realized that these desperate people inside had no ability to fire back. They were not permitted to have guns. It was a gun-free zone. But we all know a gun-free zone just makes it easier for somebody who wants to use a gun wrongly to come in and take advantage of it. So personally, I think there's a promotion going on now that I think the NRA is doing this, to recommend that they allow teachers to own guns in schools, hidden away, to protect themselves. My niece went through this in Connecticut, heard fires and shots down. She was terrified. Nobody had a gun to do anything about it. Now, there are stories, which again, we're dealing with the problem of facts, and when you twist facts, you have to really question people's motivation. There are stories of a man named Mike, for example, who was a vice principal in school, and he wasn't allowed to carry his gun in the school because it was a gun-free zone. By the way, the president does have his children in a school that doesn't allow that, doesn't it? So when you have this issue of Mike being there in the school and seeing that somebody came in with a gun, he ran out, took his gun out of his his glove compartment, came back and stopped the criminal. So it just doesn't make sense, logically nor factually, to say, take away guns and you make things better. Take away guns and everywhere you go, the facts say it makes things worse because the criminals then get the upper hand. Pardon my editorial, is it? Do you have an opinion of all the New York State senators voting yea for the budget that funds on the SAFE Act, that funded the SAFE Act? Apparently there were people who voted against the SAFE Act but then voted to fund it.
Yeah, and someone said, well, they got an explanation from one of their senators. And I would say, I think the state senators need to be held accountable because they knew full well that that law was passed before the budget was passed and that somewhere in that budget there was going to be funding for the SAFE Act. And they should have made it clear to the government they're not going to vote for a budget that funds that SAFE Act. I mean, that would have been a logical. But to say they didn't know that there was funding for the SAFE Act in the budget, I think is not being honest with us.
Do you recall any wording or no wording in the Constitution that prohibits the U.S. from enacting laws of other nations? Does the UN Treaty really speak to that? Can we give up our sovereignty? By the way, for the sake of the audience, Mike Huckabee sent out an email, and I got it, and the material came in the mail as well, talking about Citizens for American Sovereignty, I think was the title, saying that we want to protest our government giving over our sovereignty to anybody else. Does the government have the right to do that, is the question, I think.
There's no question that the Constitution is sacrosanct. So the Constitution should be the document that we adhere to. But given all that's going on, and given the UN, the countries that came together in the UN are all countries that want to decrease the amount of violence in the world, and the whole liberal mess coming out of the UN, and put together this treaty. And maybe in another time we'd look at each other and we'd say, no, we know we're good. The Constitution reigns and we don't have to worry about this treaty. But given what's going on right now, I think there's grave concern that maybe not right now, but that if the Senate ratifies that treaty, I hope that the Senate will not do that and the President will not sign that treaty. Maybe not now, but this thing is not going to stop. And we need to be vigilant about it. And I think the reality of it is, given what's going on in our country and this whole sentiment to really against guns and limiting our Second Amendment rights, nothing would surprise me. There was a time, maybe even 3 or 4 years ago, if you said this UN treaty and you would be concerned, you'd say, no, the Constitution. But I don't have that confidence right now, and I think that we have to be realistic and we have to be on the offense. We don't want that treaty. We are Americans, and we have our Constitution, and we don't want to be subject to any other nation.
And the question that follows that is, what percentage Senate vote is required to ratify the UN treaty?
I think they need 2/3 to ratify a treaty. It's not just a simple majority.
So does that give us hope?
Yeah.
Well, we had hope. I mean, to be honest with you, I didn't think that they were going to pass. So many Democrats in the Senate were concerned about any gun legislation that I really thought they weren't going to do what they did last week and vote to get the votes and the amendments out there. So it seems like my gut just has this feeling like people are succumbing to the emotional arguments rather than staying on point, that this legislation that they're all talking about isn't going to do one whit to avoid what has happened. It's not going to help that. But as I mentioned earlier, politicians want to make themselves feel good. They want to be able to say, here's what we did to stop gun violence. But when you look at the facts, it hasn't done anything to decrease. In fact, it may even increase gun violence. So, I'd like to think so.
If they do come, going back to the question of mental illness, the illustration that we gave, if they came to confiscate because they say you're mentally ill, how would you go about this legally, not giving in to them? Just elaborate a little bit more on that.
Well, in this country, really, again, the essence of we have what's called due process. We have notice and the opportunity to be heard. So whether it's the seizing of your guns or someone saying that you're mentally incompetent, the court just can't unilaterally do that. There has to be notice and there has to be an opportunity to be heard. And that's why it's so important. I mentioned a clear path from, say, a teacher or a parent or a healthcare professional who notices erratic behavior and feels that that person could be a threat. Or maybe that person said, I'm going to go kill somebody. So there's the imminent threat. There's no clear path to get them to a court. But in that court, there has to be an attorney to be the voice and to be the representative for the person that they're accusing of. But that notice and opportunity to be heard is every American's right. And that's something that, again, you worry about in these days, but everyone does have the right to be noticed and be heard.
What is the well-regulated militia phrase all about? And I'll add what he says. As the country changes and becomes more urban, is the Second Amendment going to remain relevant? Fewer people than ever are capable to handle firearms, but I will give you a fact that 100 million Americans own 300 million firearms. That's 1/3 of our population. So that may not be a correct perception, but the question is well intended. What is the well-regulated militia phrase all about? And out in the foyer, somebody said, are we going to have to form militias to protect ourselves?
Well, the well-regulated militia has to do with their military. And if someone wants to, if someone thinks differently, you're welcome to comment. But that's our military, and that's when the court said, in addition to being able to possess a firearm, not only in the militia, but in your home to defend your property, you have every right as an American citizen.
Now, if we hold to the Constitution and what they said and what they meant, and we use that as the gold standard for what goes on in the Senate, or in the Congress, or in the President's office, this question is relevant to many. It goes like this. With the recent actions of government officials, such as Governor Cuomo and the SAFE Act, if this is a power that is now unconstitutional, can he be prosecuted? What is the penalty for violating the Constitution for this treason?
Well, Governor Cuomo put the legislation out, but the Senate and the Assembly voted for it. Our representatives voted for it. So, you know, it's the system that's in place. There's 3 branches of government for a reason, and of course that's federal, and they established the Constitution. The executive branch, the legislative branch, you know, puts out any pieces of legislation. It's the court that will look at it and say, no, you've overstepped your bounds. That is not within the confines of the Constitution, whether it's the state constitution or our federal constitution. So that's the system we have in place to prevent that from happening. And oftentimes, we've seen the court rule something unconstitutional. The legislature does overstep the bounds, which in fact we think the SAFE Act does, oversteps the bounds of what the state legislature can do, and it's going to be incumbent upon the court. And I would guess that's a decision that will go from our highest court in New York State to the Supreme Court. And it's my guess that that's the way that will go.
Well,
and we hope and pray the court will say, no, it's
But the Supreme Court acted on this issue before. How can they not just abide by what the Supreme Court has said when they have a final authority?
Well, they'll use it as precedence. They'll use that in their briefs. They'll say the court has already said this. You know, and then the Supreme Court may say, no, we're not going to grant certiorari. We're not going to hear this case. We've already decided that case and kick it back to the state. So, you know, the court has decided, but as legislation comes up, states may pass new laws. It's sort of an ongoing thing, and it never ends.
Well, I've lost a question somewhere here, and I hope I phrase it correctly. Our voices in upstate New York are like a whisper as compared to New York City. It is very apparent our government relies on New York City opinions and needs versus upstate New York citizens. What can we do to overcome this? And somebody else had a question here about whether or not we could secede from the Union.
Just kidding. You know, it is frustrating. We all feel that way. But here's what we know, and I've said this, many of you have heard me say this. If we give up, we know we'll lose. That's the only thing we know on the horizon. If we give up, if we let our legislature get away with this, if we let our governor get away with this, we just have to keep getting louder and stronger. And as the days go on, not get weary, not say, I'm tired of talking about this, I'm tired of going to these rallies, but grow our numbers. And when you go to one of these rallies, bring 5 of your neighbors with you. This is not someone who's a Republican or a Democrat. This is not a political party issue. This is something that affects every American. And it doesn't matter whether you hunt or you don't hunt, or you want to own a gun or you don't want to own a gun. This is about one of our most fundamental rights as Americans. And you know, Bruce, the theme of this series of talks is that they can take away our Second Amendment rights. They can take away all of our rights. Right. We've seen this as the blatant attack on our Second Amendment, our constitutional right. But we've seen freedom of speech, all of the Affordable Care Act, the effects on freedom of religion. So this is something that's going on in a lot of arenas, and every American should be concerned. It's not a political issue. It is the most, I don't even know how to, the most fundamental issue of what our nation is about. It is the essence of America, the first 10 amendments of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. And that's why we can't grow weary. Every time you feel like I'm tired of complaining about this, I've gone to 2 rallies, go to a 3rd, write a letter, pick up the phone and call your representative, hold your state legislatures accountable, and fight harder, and don't, you know, it's tempting because we are upstate. But you know what I've learned over the last 3 years since I've been out in the public lot? More people think like we do. More people believe in that Constitution. More people love this country and want the government out of their lives than we think. And we've been intimidated and we've been silenced by the tyranny of the minority, by the post-standard of the world, by the media that makes us feel like it's only me that thinks like this. I can go into Wegmans, I can go into a drugstore, I can go anywhere. And people say to me, you know, I'm concerned, keep fighting, don't, you know. So more people think like us than you think. And what our obligation is to empower those people, to bring them to a rally, to help them understand we're not alone. Across this state, there are hundreds of thousands of people who maybe weren't paying attention, but this issue got their attention. And maybe Governor Cuomo has done us a favor.
This is a technical question. It says, under Penal Law Section 400, the New York legislature restricts the type of pistol permits that the court may issue to New York State pistol license holders. One type of the permits you can apply for is a have a carry concealed without regard to employment or place of possession by any person with proper cause exists for the issuance thereof. Question. I wish our sheriffs were here to help with this too. Why is self-protection not a sufficient need for the issuance of a carry concealed permit?
I must say I'm not sure, I don't know who, if you want to give us your contact information. I'm not with state law, criminal law, I'm just not that familiar with it. I could hazard a guess, but you know what they say about lawyers who do that. If you want to grab me when we're done here, and I'll take your name and contact information, I'll see if I can't get you an answer. Okay.
And here's another question. If you have questions, by the way, out on the table with the sheriff's response to the SAFE Act, there's a little flyer that gives you a phone number you can call. So these people can actually go to that phone number and get these kind of questions answered. This is another one. How much live all gunpowder and primers can we have on hand? As much as you can get, I would answer. I can shoot 3,000 rounds in the summer. Can we buy ammo powder accepted through the mail from out of state? Any plans to level permits throughout the state? I guess really you need to go back to that phone number on that.
This is what the paper looks like, the sheriff's statement on the SAFE Act. And in there, if you have questions, you can, the New York State Sheriff's Association, there's contact information there, so you can contact them with any specific questions like those 2 last ones.
Okay, this question would create some speculation. The gun issue is certainly out of control. How or what % of parents have been at fault because they weren't responsible for guns in their homes? We don't have any statistics on that, but we know it could happen, right?
Oh, for sure. I mean, there's irresponsible people all over the place, and many, you know, I've not seen any measurable statistics. It's not that that's not an issue in some, but I've just not seen anything measured or any reports of that or any justification to limit our Second Amendment rights because of that problem. I do know, when Cheryl was telling me about this the other day, she was in the pediatrician's office, and there is a question in your, as you're filling out your form for your child's physical that asks you if you have a gun in your home. And that's another, that door is even opened wider in the SAFE Act. It's sort of a kind of a backdoor attempt.
We need to turn the tables and fight back. We have to start a movement for a bill to have background checks on all politicians. I can't quite read this, I'm sorry. If you recognize this, that you wrote it, if you please articulate it from where you're sitting. At the time, the right to bear arms was firmly intended for the public to protect itself against the government, more so than to protect us from each other, so it seems. All the proposals to restrict or do away with the right to bear arms are proposals to demonstrate the need for us to be protected against each other. I believe this is deceptive. Now, I'm not sure I understand the question. Who gave us that question? So would you please stand and repeat it for us, and we can possibly answer it?
Initially, it seems like the intention of the Second Amendment was to protect us against the government. However, the way they're selling the restrictions of the Second Amendment now are the infringements of us not being protecting us against each other. And I think that the government has an agenda here.
I see what you're saying. But they're trying to make the case that we need to watch out for each other when we really need to watch out for them. Is that what you're saying?
Pay no attention to the man.
Yes. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Well, we've concluded the formal question and answer time, and Congresswoman Anne Marie Buerkle will be up here if you have something you'd like to talk to her about. I'll be out on the floor if you want to talk to me. But before we close, would you please come here now? Gary Perry. He is turning Albany upside down is the name of his organization. And okay, now just give us a little brief understanding of what you think is happening across the state. With what I got today, with all these rallies going on, and you're preparing another one, give us a sense of the grass movement response, and how can we capitalize on it?
Well, first of all, I was up with Governor of North today. I'm a little late. I apologize. My suit and tie is out in the truck. I couldn't change. I see a few familiar faces here. We had a good turnout today on a cold, windy, rainy day in upstate New York. Imagine that. But and I've been involved in New York State politics as a grassroots person since 2009, 2010. Before that, I was a good Republican soldier. I was a committee man, and I did what the Republican chairman asked me to do. In 2009, 2010, I learned to be a real committee man. Became a pain in the butt to the Republican Party. So now I pretend to be a Republican to help conservative candidates. And all I can say is that you've got to get involved because you can make a difference. Politicians wouldn't have given me the time of day 7, 8, or 9 years ago. Now they're a little worried where I'm going to go here. So turn it all upside down. We're grassroots. We're trying to encourage citizens like you to run for public office. Former Congresswoman Buerkle, well, I'd love to see her run for Lieutenant Governor. That's my personal opinion. We want people to step up and get involved. And you're a little discouraged about the numbers of New York City versus upstate. I spent a lot of time in New York City, Manhattan, Long Island. There are conservatives down there. And I can tell you, if everybody in upstate New York got involved and got active and voted, we can sway those numbers. It won't be easy, but it's definitely doable. So what Turn It All Upside Down is, we're asking you folks, and you can work with us, we're asking you to get involved and seek out a candidate. support that candidate. I spent every single weekend last year campaigning across New York State from Plattsburgh to Newburgh to Oneonta to out the area. So I had a lot of candidates, and I was overworked and understaffed. I had actually committed to come help Dan Reed a few times. I didn't make it. But we can take New York State back. I've committed to every ounce of energy and spare time I have between now and next year. Next year we can really make a difference. I want you people to be fired up a year from now. And it's going to be a long year because you have the petitioning process, the primary process. But we can make a difference. It can be done. So turn it off the upside down. I was asking you to become involved as much as you can, your friends, your family. It's a grassroots opportunity. I don't know, how many of you saw Congresswoman Buerkle give her speech at CPAC? How many people saw that? I'll be honest with you, when I sat down to watch it, she starts out really nice, and I've gotten to know her a little bit through phone calls and email conversation. So as she's speaking, I'm taking the liberty of taking notes of what I can talk to her about on our next phone conversation. I'm writing down all the things I think she'd be saying. She's doing a great job so far. All of a sudden, I'm checking off everything I wrote down. She got done, and everything I wrote down, I checked off because she covered it. So I said, wow, she gets it. There are other candidates across the state who get it too at assembly levels and our Senate level. They do get it. What they're lacking, there are some senators on the fence. They want to be more conservative, but they also want to get reelected. They need to know that we have their back. If they know that they have the backing of us, they will become more like us, more conservative. Right now, they're voting to get back in office at the next election. So if they know that there's enough I hate that word activist, but we're considered activists. If you go out and help a candidate, you're considered an activist. It's rewarding to me. I feel like